My daughter stood in front of 200 guests, her veil, her flowers, her borrowed pearls. And she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Mom, I didn't invite you to sit in the front row because, frankly, you embarrass me. You're too poor to be seen up there." I was wearing a dress I'd bought at a thrift store. My shoes had a small crack along the left sole, and I was sitting in the back row, the very last row of a venue I had purchased with cash 14 years ago and never told a single soul about. Everyone in that room thought they knew who I was. A quiet woman, a humble woman, a woman who cleaned houses for a living and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. None of them knew what was about to happen when I stood up and walked to the front of that room. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, drop it down in the comments right now, because this story is for you. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit that like button, because I share stories every week that will make you feel everything. And I mean everything. Now tell me in the comments, if your own child humiliated you in front of hundreds of people, what would you do? Would you walk away quietly, or would you finally let them see exactly who you are? Let's get into it. My name is Carol, and I want to be very careful about how I start this story, because I've spent my entire life being careful, being quiet, being the woman in the background who nobody really paid attention to. And honestly, I was okay with that. I chose that. I'm 50 years old. I live in a modest house in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. The kind of city where everyone knows the name of the diner on Main Street, where the hardware store is still family-owned, where people wave at you from their front porches in the summer. I've lived here my whole life. I grew up here. I raised my daughter here. And I built something here that I never once bragged about, because that's just not who I am. On the surface, I am exactly who I appear to be. I clean houses for a living. I have 14 regular clients, mostly older folks who need help around the home, and I genuinely love each and every one of them. I drive a Honda Civic that has 140,000 miles on it. I shop at the discount grocery store 2 towns over because the prices are better. I buy clothes at the thrift shop on Cedar Avenue, and I am not embarrassed about that. Not even a little bit. I learned a long time ago that the price tag on your clothes has absolutely nothing to do with the size of your heart or the depth of your character. I also learned something else a long time ago, something my mother told me when I was just 8 years old, sitting on her lap in the kitchen of the house where I grew up. She said, "Carol, baby, never let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Bless people quietly, build quietly, live quietly, and one day the ones who overlooked you will understand why." I never forgot that. When I was 22 years old, I got pregnant with my daughter Melissa. Her father was a man I'd loved deeply and foolishly, and when he found out about the baby, he drove out of town and didn't look back. I was devastated. I was scared. I was alone, and I was absolutely determined that my daughter would never, ever want for anything. I worked 3 jobs through my pregnancy. I cleaned offices at night, waitressed on weekends, and babysat during the day. I saved every dollar I possibly could. I didn't go out to eat. I didn't buy new things. I wore the same 4 outfits to work for 2 years straight. I drove a car that cost me $800, and I prayed over that engine every single morning. But here's the thing about living quietly and spending almost nothing. It means you accumulate, slowly, patiently, invisibly. By the time Melissa was 5 years old, I had saved enough to buy my little house outright. No mortgage, no loan. Cash. The realtor looked at me like I'd walked into the wrong office. He kept asking me if I was sure I didn't want to finance, if I had a co-signer, if I needed more time to think it over. I just smiled and handed him the cashier's check and said, "I'm sure." That house became my foundation, and once I owned it, I didn't stop. I kept saving. I invested in small things, a rental unit here, a piece of vacant land there. Nothing flashy, nothing that required me to change who I was or how I lived. Every investment I made quietly, because I remembered what my mother said: build quietly. 14 years ago, when Melissa was in her early 20s and already starting to look at me with that particular kind of disappointment children sometimes get when their parents don't match the image they've created in their heads, I purchased an event venue. A beautiful old building on the edge of town, a converted 1920s ballroom with original hardwood floors, 16-foot ceilings, a wraparound garden, and enough space to host 300 people comfortably. I bought it because I loved it. I bought it because it reminded me of elegance and permanence, and the idea that beautiful things deserve to be preserved. I bought it in a holding company under a name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know where to look, and I rented it out to weddings, galas, corporate events, holiday parties, 50, 60 events a year. I never told Melissa. I never told anyone, really. My accountant knew, my lawyer knew, and that was it. To the rest of the world, I was still just Carol, the cleaning lady with the cracked shoe and the thrift store dress. Melissa grew up smart and driven and beautiful. I'm so proud of her for those things, even now, even after everything. She got a full academic scholarship to a university 3 states away, married a man named Derek whose family had old money and newer opinions, and somewhere along the way she began to look at her childhood, at me, like something she needed to explain away. It started small, little comments at holidays. "Mom, you don't have to bring a casserole, it's a catered event." Or, "Mom, I already told Derek's parents you were just, a self-employed housekeeper." The way she said "just," that word sat in my chest like a stone. Over the years, I watched my daughter build a life I didn't quite fit into. Her friends were all professionals. Her social events were expensive and curated. She moved in circles where the first question anyone asked was, "What do you do?" as if your job title is your worth. And every time she introduced me to someone new, I watched her choose her words carefully, watched her make me smaller in the telling, so that I'd fit more neatly into her world. I never said anything. I loved her. I figured she was young, that she was still finding herself, that one day she'd look back and understand. Mothers do that. We hold on to hope the way we hold on to everything else, quietly, patiently, in the dark. But then she got engaged to Derek, and everything I'd been holding quietly in my chest began to feel heavier than I could carry. When Melissa called to tell me she was getting married, I was genuinely happy. I cried those good tears, the ones that come from somewhere deep and clean. I asked when. I asked about the proposal. I asked how Derek had done it. She was glowing over the phone, and for a moment she was just my daughter again. My little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder watching old black and white movies on Saturday nights. Then she told me the venue. She said, "We found the most incredible place, Mom. It's called Haverford Hall. It's this absolutely stunning old ballroom on the edge of town, original floors, high ceilings, a wraparound garden, and enough space to host 300 people comfortably. Both Derek and I fell in love with it the moment we walked in. I sat very still on my kitchen chair. I looked at the wall. I let a slow breath out through my nose. Haverford Hall, my building, the one I'd owned for 14 years, the one I'd restored and maintained and poured money and love into for a decade. My daughter was getting married in my building, and she had no idea. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I just smiled into the phone and said, "That sounds absolutely beautiful, sweetheart." And then the invitations came, or rather the non-invitation. Melissa called me 2 weeks before the wedding with what I can describe as a rehearsed speech. She told me she loved me, but that she needed to be honest with me. She said Derek's family had certain expectations about the event. She said she'd had to make some difficult decisions about seating arrangements because some of Derek's colleagues and family members would be in the front rows, and she didn't want me to be, and I'm quoting her here, out of place. She said she'd reserved me a seat in the back of the venue, row 17. I asked her why. She said, "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know how you come across sometimes. You're wonderful, but you're not exactly the image we're trying to project. Derek's family is very, and I just think it's bangets for everyone if you stay in the back and don't draw attention." I sat with that for a long time after I hung up, a very long time. I got up early the morning of the wedding. I put on my thrift store dress, a pale blue one that I actually loved, even if no one else would. I polished my shoes the best I could. I put on the small pearl earrings my mother left me when she died. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. Then I drove to Haverford Hall. I arrived before almost anyone. I nodded to the venue manager, a kind man named Richard who'd worked for me for 9 years. He raised an eyebrow when he saw where the ushers tried to direct me, but he said nothing. I told him quietly that I was fine, that everything was going to be all right, and I took my seat in row 17. The venue was stunning. Of course it was. I'd made sure of that. The original floors gleamed. The high windows caught the afternoon light and sent it scattering across the ceiling in ribbons. The garden outside was in full bloom. 300 white chairs were arranged in perfect rows, and at the front, a flower arch framed the altar in a way that made the whole room look like something out of a dream. I watched it fill up around me. Derek's family, his parents, his siblings, his aunts and uncles, swept in like a wave, polished and perfumed and perfectly dressed, taking the first 7 rows without a second thought. Melissa's friends from college filled in behind them. Her future in-laws, business associates, a local city councilman, a TV news anchor I recognized from the evening broadcast. And then, in the very last row, a handful of people who looked like they'd been placed there because no one quite knew what else to do with them. An elderly neighbor from our old street, one of Melissa's childhood friends whose family had fallen on hard times, a cousin Melissa had drifted from years ago, and me. I sat very still. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I watched my daughter come down the aisle. She was breathtaking, she really was. And I felt such a complicated tangle of love and grief and something I couldn't quite name, but that sat just behind my sternum like a fist. The ceremony was beautiful. I won't take that away from it. And when it ended, when the guests moved from the main hall to the reception room for cocktails, that's when it happened. I was moving through the crowd quietly, trying to find a place to stand that wasn't in anyone's way, when I heard Melissa's voice. She was with a group of Derek's relatives, his aunt and two cousins, all of them wearing the kind of effortless wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. And she was talking about me. She didn't see me yet. She was laughing lightly, explaining something, and I heard her say, "My mother, she cleans houses. I know, but she means well. I put her in the back so she wouldn't make things awkward. She doesn't really fit, you know? She's sweet, but she's just very limited." One of the cousins laughed, not unkindly, just that automatic social laugh people give when they're following someone else's lead. And Derek's aunt, a tall woman with silver hair and very expensive shoes, looked up and saw me standing there. She looked right at me, and her expression shifted just slightly, like a person who's accidentally knocked something over and isn't sure what to do next. Melissa followed her gaze, and when she saw me, she didn't look embarrassed. She looked annoyed. She walked over to me. She lowered her voice, but not enough. She said, "Mom, what are you doing standing here? I told you to stay in your section. You're going to make this weird." I looked at her. My daughter. This woman I had worked myself to the bone for. This woman I had sacrificed and saved and bled for. This woman I had loved every single day for 28 years without condition or qualification. I said, very quietly, "Melissa, I need you to come with me for a moment." "Not now, Mom. Please." Something in my voice must have reached her because she followed me. We stepped into the small side office near the entrance to the main hall, an office I had furnished myself, with a mahogany desk and a framed print of a painting I'd always loved, and I closed the door behind us. I opened my purse. I took out a folded document I had carried in that purse every day for 14 years. I unfolded it carefully, and I laid it on the desk in front of my daughter. It was the deed to Haverford Hall. Melissa looked at it. She looked at my name. She looked at the date. She looked up at me. And for the first time in years, maybe the first time since she was a child, she looked at me like she didn't know who I was at all. "What is this?" "That is the deed to this building. I have owned Haverford Hall since you were 20 years old. I purchased it with money I saved working the jobs you've been embarrassed by your entire adult life. I restored it. I maintained it. I have been the reason this venue exists in the form that you fell in love with when you walked through that door." She stared at me. I continued, "I chose not to tell you because I didn't think you needed to know. It wasn't about impressing you or proving anything. I built things because I believe in building. But I want you to understand something right now, on your wedding day, in this building. When you look at me and you see a woman you embarrass me, a woman you need to hide in the back row, a woman who is too limited, too poor, too small for your new life." I smoothed the deed on the desk. "You are looking at the woman who owns the floor you're standing on." Melissa said nothing. Her face had gone the color of chalk. Her hands were shaking slightly. I could see it in how she was holding her bouquet. And outside the door, I could hear the guests beginning to move into the reception hall, the sound of glasses and laughter, and a string quartet starting to tune up. I folded the deed. I put it back in my purse. I smoothed my thrift store dress and I said, very gently, I am going to go take my seat. And if it's all the same to you, I'd like to sit somewhere I can see your face. What happened in the next 20 minutes, I will tell you honestly, it was not what I planned. I hadn't planned anything, actually. I hadn't come to that wedding with any intention except to watch my daughter get married. The confrontation in the office was quiet, private, just the two of us. I had no intention of making a scene in front of her guests. But Melissa, my daughter, who has always been fierce and impulsive and volcanic when she feels cornered, did not take what I said quietly. She followed me out of that office, and she didn't follow me quietly. She grabbed my arm in the hallway and said, loud enough for several nearby guests to turn, "You can't just... This doesn't change anything, Mom. This isn't the time for this." I turned to face her. I kept my voice low. "I'm going to sit down, Melissa. You're trying to make this about you. I'm going to sit down." But by then, Derek had noticed, and Derek's mother, a sharp, perceptive woman named Helen, who had always been more curious about me than anyone in that family, had also noticed. Helen walked over with the particular precision of a woman who has navigated social catastrophes before. She touched Melissa's arm. She looked at me with a kind, direct expression, and she said, "Carol, is everything all right?" I was about to say yes, just smile and redirect and let everyone move on, when Melissa said in a voice that was trembling with something I couldn't quite read, "Mom says she owns this venue." The hallway went quiet. Not silent. The party was still going in the next room, but the little pocket of space around us went very still. Helen looked at me. "Is that true?" I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Then I looked at Helen. "Yes," I said. "I have owned Haverford Hall for 14 years. Helen stared at me, and then, slowly, she began to smile. It was the kind of smile that holds dozen complex things at once: surprise, amusement, respect, and something that looked a lot like admiration. She turned to Melissa and she said, quietly but very clearly, "Your mother owns the venue, Melissa. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Melissa looked like she wanted the hardwood floors to open up and swallow her whole. I didn't gloat. That's not in my nature. I simply said to Helen, "I'd like to sit somewhere I can see Melissa's face during the reception, if that's possible to arrange." Helen turned to the nearest usher, one of Derek's cousins, and she said, with a calm authority that clearly ran in their family, "Please move Carol to the front table right now." I sat at the front table for the rest of the evening. I won't pretend it was comfortable, at least not at first. Melissa was rigid with a complicated kind of shame that I recognized because I had seen it before. Not as shame of me, but as shame of herself, which is a much heavier thing to carry. Derek, to his credit, was gracious and warm to me all evening. He came and sat with me during the cocktail hour and talked to me easily and genuinely, and I understood immediately why Melissa had loved him. Helen checked on me twice. Several of Derek's relatives who'd been in the front rows since the ceremony came over to introduce themselves with what felt like genuine curiosity and warmth. Word had traveled, as word does. By the time dinner was served, everyone at that wedding knew. Some had looked up the property records on their phones already, this is the age we live in, and confirmed it. Some were whispering, some were openly staring at me with expressions I could only describe as recalibrated. I ate my dinner. I smiled at the people who spoke to me. I watched my daughter and her new husband dance their first dance, and I cried. Not bitter tears, not victorious tears, just the real kind. The kind that come from watching your child step into the life they've built, even when the life they've built has some sharp edges you're still learning to navigate around. But here is the part I want you to hear carefully, because this is the part that matters most to me. At the end of the night, as the guests were leaving and the staff was beginning to clear tables, Melissa came and found me. She was still in her dress. Her makeup was a little smudged. She'd been crying earlier, which I'd noticed and quietly filed away. She sat down next to me in one of the empty chairs, and she didn't say anything for a long time. We both just sat there, in this building I owned, listening to the last song the quartet was playing in the corner. Then she said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. "Because I didn't need you to know," I said. "I didn't build it for credit. I built it because I believed in it." She was quiet again. Then, "I'm sorry, Mom." 2 words, small words, but she said them like she meant them, like she was saying them from someplace real and raw and new. And I know my daughter. I know the difference between a performative apology and a real one. That was a real one. I took her hand. "I know," I said. "I love you anyway. I always have." I want to leave you with something that I've been thinking about ever since that day, and it has nothing to do with the venue or the property value or the fact that my name was on a deed that my daughter had no idea existed. It has to do with this. The people in your life who underestimate you, they're usually not doing it out of malice. They're doing it because they're looking at the surface and making a story out of what they see. A thrift store dress, a cracked shoe, a 10-year-old Honda Civic. They build a narrative about you from those things, and they live inside that narrative so completely that they can no longer see you at all. They can only see the story they've made. What I've learned is this. The most powerful thing you can do is not to argue with the story they've made. Don't correct them. Don't defend yourself. Don't perform wealth or status or success to prove a point. Just keep building. Keep working. Keep living by the quiet, steady values that got you to where you are. And let the truth reveal itself on its own timeline. Because it will. It always does. My daughter and I talk every week now. We're doing the work, the real work, of understanding each other more honestly than we ever did before. That work isn't finished, but it's happening, and that matters more to me than anything else in the world. This building, my Haverford Hall, is hosting another wedding next Saturday. Beautiful people, beautiful day. And I'll be doing what I always do, watching quietly from the background, taking care of everything, making sure the floors shine and the flowers bloom and the lights are exactly right. Because that's who I am. Carol, the cleaning lady, the woman in the thrift store dress, the woman who owns the floor you're standing on.